It's September 12th, 1966, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
For a TV show that lasted only 2 seasons, it is remarkable that everyone still knows the theme tune to the Monkees, a zany sitcom about 4 young men who live by the beach and are in a band and have hair. The storylines are a bit surreal and vague, but the tunes were always on point and immediately lapped up by America's youth when the show premiered on this day in 1966.
Yeah, and the first episode was called Royal Flush, and they'd actually already filmed 13 episodes. They had all of those 13 in the can. This was sequentially the third that had been produced, but they decided to switch around the order in which they were going to play because of the growing fan base that one of the Monkees, Davy Jones, had due to the fact that he had already released his own LP called David Jones in 1965. And so he had a bit of a following, and this was a very Davy Jones-heavy episode, and so they were like, well, let's rush that one out the door.
I watched this episode, and as soon as Davy Jones started speaking, I was like, this is just Frank Spencer.
That's so true.
It's the weirdest thing. He's so small and squeaky.
And he was the hot one.
I mean, okay, so the good looks of the Monkees. So it's Davy Jones, right? Michael Neesmith. Huge gap. Then Mickey Dolenz, Peter Tork. They are a strange... They're one of those people... You know how when you go to a flea market and you see a whole table of antiques and it looks pretty good and you think, oh, I'll get something for my house because that looks amazing. But when you go up close and look at each item, you're like, oh, I don't actually want any of these items in my home. That's what the Monkees were giving aesthetically.
Beatles from a distance.
Yeah, Beatles from a distance.
Yeah, well, Jones was something of a showbiz pro when he was cast in the Monkees. He'd been the Artful Dodger in the Broadway production of Oliver. So that's where the Cockney vibes are coming from.
He had been Ina Sharples' grandson in Coronation Street.
There you go. Whereas the others were Yanks and less well-known, although Mickey Dolenz had been a child star as well. And they were thrown together. Now, this story is obviously very well-trodden for anyone who's a fan of the Monkees, but for people who aren't, they are often called the first boy band because they were put together having never met each other or worked with each other ever before into a band purely for the purposes of this TV show. So they were actors first, kind of good-looking second, as you were saying, Rebecca, and then kind of third musical talent. And they'd answered an ad which sought, quote, 4 insane boys, 17 to 21, which actually was a pretty good casting call. Sort of captures the zaniness, doesn't it?
The casting call had 2 other weird bits in it. They said they wanted spirited Ben Franks types and they must come down for interview. And apparently both of those bits in the advert were kind of sly nods to the druggy flower child spirit of the age. So Ben Franks was this popular Sunset Strip restaurant where apparently mods used to get together over burgers and fries, or as Davy Jones called them, long-haired beatnik weirdos. And the must come down for interview was a reference to being high and needing to come down and come along to the party.
God, you really had to be able to read between the lines.
Rad.
In your copy of The Stage or whatever it was. In your Hollywood Reporter whilst high on pot. They're looking for a very particular, ambitious and yet laid-back kind of boy.
Well, of course, the Monkees from the start were being compared to the Beatles, but the programme was the brainchild of a dynamic young producer and a bit of a bohemian himself called Bob Rafelson, who had been in a band, and he and his partner, Bert Schneider, decided they were going to make a show that was about, the antics of a group on the road. He said he had this idea before the Beatles were even famous. Yeah, well, who's to say? And Rafelson said later that his initial idea was to have a real band playing a fictionalised version of themselves, an idea that obviously would later be perfected with Miami 7, but eventually decided that it would be easier to create a fake band, which would also be a real band in the sense that they would release records as a soundtrack of the TV show. Bit of synergy. But this ended up getting way out of control. If you've read the myth about Pygmalion, the sculptor creates his statue and it comes to life. This is kind of what happened. He created a fake band and they tore their way out of the screen and became a real band against everyone's intention.
Well, but partly because of Rafelson's cool credentials himself, I think. I think that gets underplayed a bit. Because, yes, he had this nakedly cynical commercial idea. The Beatles are massive, let's create an American equivalent who look a bit like them. But he himself is absolutely at the forefront of the countercultural movement of the time. He's the director of 5 Easy Pieces, right? He was a producer of Easy Rider. So, yes, he's doing something that is a very, very commercial mainstream idea, But he is coming from that same background himself. He would get all those jokes about coming down for interview. And that's what's so cunning about what they did, right? When you're watching it, you're not feeling this is the Hollywood sanitized version of hippie culture. It feels like it is part of the conversation.
Even in their selection of the band members who came to comprise the Monkees, you know, they held this casting call where apparently it was this completely sort of off-the-wall affair with Schneider and Rafelson doing these bizarre things to work out effectively how applicants would respond and then deciding whether they had the right stuff. So at one example, they pulled the chair out from under Talk, and he responded apparently by starting to knock things playfully off the producers' desks in a sort of mock being angry with what had happened to him. So I think they knew what they were looking for and they knew what was going to work.
And a flavour of that actually extended out into the show itself when it went to air, because they would often end with a fourth wall breaking moment of the Monkees sitting around on set, talking about the previous episode, talking about random stuff. Apparently that was initially introduced because sometimes the episodes would end up a minute or two short, because they were really, the plots were surreal, the editing was really frantic. I can imagine it must have been very difficult to be like, okay, there's our 25 minutes or whatever. So they would end with these sort of backstage moments. But it was something that set it apart from other things. You know, Rafelson wanted the show to have a sort of avant-garde edge influenced by European films, but most of those gimmicks look so goofy now, like jump cuts and sped up effects. That just looks corny now. But the fourth wall breaking stuff, it's actually really clever and just really charming and interesting, and more than you would expect from something that was obviously created to appeal to tweens.
Yeah, I've never watched a full episode of The Monkees before. I've seen clips, and I come to realise watching a full episode that actually I think all I've ever seen is on daytime TV when they were interviewing a surviving member. They just show the title sequence. So I felt like I'd seen it. I'd actually just seen the title sequence, which in itself has lots of clips from other episodes. But sitting down and watching a whole episode, it makes absolutely no sense. Like, there is no plot that you can follow, which in itself, of course, was hugely influential in terms of bringing avant-garde comedy into the mainstream. And B, the thing that really stuck out to me was that bit at the end. I thought that whoever had uploaded it to YouTube had accidentally stuck in a bit from a behind-the-scenes DVD. But no, that bit where they're all sitting around on director's chairs was part of the episode. And even now in the 21st century watching it, I was like, well, that's a change in shift. That's quite interesting. That's made me sit up. And I am not a 15-year-old girl from California.
And this is a reason that it took almost a year between casting the Monkees and the finished pilot making it to air. They were trying to work out how to make the Monkees into a convincing fake band. Right. And now we think of the Monkees as a band, but if you put yourself in the mindset of the moment, they were actors who were playing a fake band. So they put them on instruments that they didn't necessarily want to or know how to play. Yeah. So Davy Jones was the only accomplished drummer, but executives naturally viewed him as the front man. They didn't want him sat at the back. He was already quite small. Don't want him sitting down in the background on the drum kit. So he couldn't do that. So they put Mickey Dolenz, who couldn't play the drums, on the drums.
Like the gorilla in the Cadbury's advert all over again.
Right.
Neesmith and Talk could play the guitar, but somebody had to go on bass, so Talk had to go on bass. And so they were frantically trying to learn to just fake their way through these songs. The problem came when, towards the end of the first series, it became obvious that there was huge demand for the Monkees to go on tour as themselves.
And a bit of a backlash at that point as well, even though they were enormously popular, in that it had come to the attention of the target audience, who maybe aren't reading the music press, that they weren't writing their own songs either. Although, again, viewed from this perspective, that's a masterstroke, isn't it? I mean, why would you get four actors to write their own songs when you can employ people like Neil Sedaka and Neil Diamond and Carole King? That's who was writing the Monkees songs. That's why they're great songs still.
Yeah, I found an interview with Talk from 1982 where he said it was a unique phenomenon to be a member of a group that wasn't really a group, and yet it was a group. If we had been a group, we would have fought to be a group, or we would have broken up as a group. But, and this is where it gets sort of slightly less stoned, he said, we were a project, a TV show, and a record-making machine. And I think that really is what they were. You know, they became something that was a bit of all of those things and kind of greater than the sum of their parts.
Monkey Mania, even in the US, however, was short-lived. A lot of it was to do with the fact that all four bandmates had really different visions for what they wanted to do, and their attempts to dictate the direction of the show. Keep in mind that they're all like 18, 19. I think Talk was the oldest. He was 23. So they were still really young guys, obviously high on the thrill of being in charge of everything, and probably high also.
Yeah.
And NBC cancelled the show after season 2. And it was after that they appeared in Rafelson. It was Rafelson who made that film Head. And they said afterwards that, the film was a flop and it basically killed the Monkees. But afterwards, Neesmith claimed that was actually Rafelson's intention all along. He was becoming pretty big in the new Hollywood movement. And it seemed like he just wanted to kill his creation.
Well, apparently also the film was meant to be called something else before they changed its name to Head, because at this stage, Rafelson had in mind that he wanted to go and make Easy Rider, and they wanted the poster to be able to read "From the guys that gave you head."
Tomorrow.
He did meet with immediate broad condemnation. The then President Obama called him a jackass.
Ditch the ads and get a Sunday episode when you join Club Retrospectors. Patreon.com/Retrospectors.